My name is Delaney Marsh. I am 31 years old, and right now the retired Justice of the Ontario Court of Appeal is standing at the far end of my mother's Mississauga dining room, holding a glass of Perrier, and the toast he began 3 minutes ago about my sister's engagement has shifted into something else entirely. Something precise. He has stopped walking. He has stopped walking directly in front of my chair, and the room has gone still in that particular way. Rooms go still when everyone understands that something is about to happen, that no one planned for. 1 second ago my mother was glowing. My sister was pressed against her fiancé's arm, her ring catching light from the chandelier. And then Felix's father looked down at me and said, in a voice accustomed to courtrooms, "Forgive me, I wasn't expecting to meet you here this evening." He let that sit for one full breath. Then, "What is your relationship to this family?" Every glass stopped halfway to a mouth. My mother laughed, that bright, papery laugh she reserves for moments she needs to survive, and spoke before I could draw air. "Delaney is our eldest, community work, mostly, very behind the scenes." He did not look at her. To understand how I became the daughter my own mother learned to introduce apologetically, you have to understand the gallery wall. That's what I call it now. I named it something different when I was 9. Standing in the hallway of our house in Mississauga, staring at the arrangement of framed photographs, my mother curated along the left wall between the coat closet and the kitchen door. She updated it the way some people update their Instagram, regularly, intentionally, always toward a particular story she wanted to tell about us. My sister at her dance recital, age 7, mid-spin, tutu, blurred. My sister at her swim club championships, age 11, holding a ribbon. My sister and a group of school friends at her 16th birthday at the Mandarin, everyone laughing. My grade 4 science fair ribbon, first place, regional level, had been framed and hung there once. I know because I watched my mother hang it. I watched her step back and adjust the frame until it was level. 3 weeks later it was gone, replaced by a formal portrait of the 4 of us at my sister's middle school graduation. I rehung it myself one afternoon when my mother was at the Sobeys on Burnhamthorpe, tucked it into the corner of another frame, the way you do when you're 9 years old and you don't have a hammer. The next time I looked, it was gone again. I just kept checking, over the years. The way you do, when you're still hoping someone will remember to include you without being asked. My mother had a gift for the version of things. Not lies, exactly. More like selective architecture. She built rooms in the stories she told about our family, and certain details lived in those rooms and others simply did not. When I got into Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto, she told her book club that I was exploring legal work, the way you might say someone is exploring real estate when they've just passed their broker's exam. When I graduated and took a position at Kestrel Community Legal Clinic in the East End of Toronto, she told people I was doing advocacy, which is technically true, the same way saying a surgeon works with patients is technically true. Kestrel is a legal aid clinic. We take cases that private firms won't touch because the clients can't pay, and the law is complicated, and the fights are long. I work in housing. Wrongful evictions, illegal rent increases, landlords who pocket rent deposits and go silent when the heat stops working. In Ontario, if your landlord serves you a fraudulent eviction notice in November, I am the person whose number gets passed around at the community center. I am the person who shows up at the landlord and tenant board hearing room on a Wednesday morning when you're afraid. My mother told the neighbors I did office support for a legal office. I know because my aunt ran into our neighbor at the Sobeys and repeated it back to me at Christmas with the particular expression of someone delivering news they know will land badly. I had, at that point, just begun the first year of what would become a 3-year housing rights case, involving 63 tenants in a Scarborough apartment building who had been served with mass eviction notices in mid-November. The owner wanted to convert to condos. Most of the tenants were newcomers, several were elderly. None of them had navigated the LTB process before, and most couldn't afford a private lawyer to help them start. I worked that case across nights and weekends, for 2 years before it reached the Ontario Court of Appeal. I argued it myself. We won. The decision was referenced in housing policy discussions at Queen's Park that following spring. The Osgoode Hall Law Journal ran a commentary piece, citing our factum. I called my mother the afternoon the decision came down. She let me get through 2 sentences before mentioning that my sister had been promoted to senior events coordinator at her hotel and would be overseeing the CNE gala that summer. I drove back to my apartment in Leslieville. Sat in the parking spot behind my building for a long time staring at nothing, and then went upstairs and added the decision to a folder on my desk that I had stopped showing anyone. The problem was never my sister's job. My sister loves her work. She is genuinely good at it. Coordinating a large event is complicated in ways people underestimate, and she makes it look frictionless. The problem was what my mother did with it. To hear her describe my sister to Felix's family, she was essentially the creative director of Toronto's hospitality scene, managing relationships with some of the city's most prominent families, overseeing luxury client experiences at the Royal York. When I asked my mother once, gently, whether the framing was a bit much, she looked at me with something between pity and impatience. Not everything has to be technically precise, Delaney. I don't have an Instagram-friendly version of what I do. I have a caseload, a client file system, a junior lawyer I'm mentoring, and a standing Tuesday appearance at 47 Shepherd. No one is photographing that. So my mother built a more presentable story for my sister. And she built a quieter, smaller story for me, and she told them both so consistently that I think she stopped noticing which one was real. In 7 years of my published legal work, my name did not appear once on the gallery wall. Not the Law Times profile, not the Osgood piece, not the local paper story with the headline about the Scarborough tenants keeping their homes, just my elbow in the Christmas photo. From 2022, cropped at the edge of a frame. 4 months before the engagement dinner, I ran into Felix's father at a continuing legal education conference at the Sheraton Center downtown. He was giving the keynote. I was in the second row because I had helped coordinate the panel on housing tribunal reform. After his talk, he made his way through the crowd and stopped in front of me with the directness of someone who spent decades on the bench and has no patience for small gestures. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "I've been hoping to meet you. The factum your clinic filed in the Marchetti Abubakar case, the section on systemic barriers to LTB access, that reasoning was yours?" It was. "It changed how I thought about questions I'd been turning over for some time," he said. Then, someone pulled him into another conversation, and he was gone. I stood in the middle of that hotel conference room for a full minute before I remembered how to walk. I wanted to call my mother. I didn't. The night of the engagement dinner, I reached for the blazer I'd worn when I accepted the Pro Bono Ontario award the previous spring. I hadn't planned to wear it. It came to my hand before I thought about it. Standing in my Leslieville bedroom holding it, I understood why. It was the one piece of clothing that knew exactly who I was. My mother opened the door before I reached the porch. She took a fast inventory of my appearance without seeming to. The way she's always done. "You're early, come in, I need to go over a few things." She moved through the kitchen like a stage manager giving final notes before opening night. She had placed my seat at the far end of the table, nearest the kitchen door. When I mentioned this, quietly I thought, she paused at the counter. "This night is about your sister. Felix's family is important to us. His father was on the Court of Appeal for 20 years. Just be warm and let the evening breathe. You know how you can get on the subject of your cases." "I do know. I care about the work. Apparently that is the issue." The guests arrived. Felix, who I genuinely like, and his mother Gwendolyn. Warm but precise in the way people are, when they've always been direct and see no reason to stop. And his father, whom I recognized the moment he stepped through the door. My mother introduced me to the room as our eldest. She does community advocacy work. Very behind-the-scenes type. She said it the way you describe a neighbor you've never quite figured out. He took my hand, looked at me, looked again, the way people do when they're placing a face into the right file. My mother steered the room toward the table. As he turned away, he glanced back over his shoulder. The filing was already happening. Dinner was my mother's masterpiece. She orchestrated it without appearing to. Poured the wine, passed the bread, narrated my sister's highlights like a docent, walking a tour through the most beautiful rooms. Every time Gwendolyn tried to redirect toward me, my mother absorbed it. "Delaney, could you check whether we need more sparkling water?" "Delaney, I think we're running low on rolls." The third time Gwendolyn tried to loop me in, she had been working her way toward asking what kind of cases my clinic handled. My mother spoke directly over my first sentence with a smooth pivot about my sister's upcoming event at the Royal York. Then Felix's father tapped his water glass. He stood slowly, buttoned his jacket with the deliberate and unhurried movement of someone who has delivered verdicts in packed courtrooms and understands that pace is its own kind of authority, and began to speak. He talked about what it means to welcome someone into a family, about the difference between performing well and being trustworthy, about how 40 years in law had taught him to tell those things apart. He gave my sister a warm and genuine sentence about her laugh, and the way she made Felix settle into himself. And then he began walking. Not back to his seat, around the outer perimeter of the table, slowly, the way you pace when the point you're making needs to land somewhere specific. He stopped at my chair. "Forgive me," he said again, and this time it was quieter, and it was only for me. "I wasn't expecting to meet you here this evening." He held my gaze steadily. "What is your relationship to this family?" I thought about swallowing it. I know how to swallow it. I have been swallowing it at this table since I was 9 years old, watching my picture get moved back behind a frame. I thought about repeating my mother's line, smiling, letting the moment close. And then I thought about the conference hallway at the Sheraton. I thought about the folder on my desk that nobody opens. I thought about 63 tenants in Scarborough who got to stay in their homes through January. Because someone learned their file. I'm Meredith's older sister, I said, and I'm a litigation lawyer at Kestrel Community Legal Clinic. I specialize in housing rights. My mother, she does a type of community. He didn't look at her. The Marchetti Abubakar case, he said. That was your clinic's file. I argued it. He set his glass down on the table. Mrs. Marsh's clinic argued a matter before the Court of Appeal that produced a decision now cited in provincial housing legislation. He said it to the room, not dramatically. The way someone would if they wanted a reaction, but the way you correct a record when the record has been wrong for too long. The analysis in the factum on systemic access barriers was cited in my law journal commentary last fall. It was some of the most precise housing law reasoning I've encountered in many years of reading these cases. The table was very quiet. Gwendolyn set her fork down and looked at my mother. Her voice was even and without warmth. You described her as doing administrative work. Office-based advocacy, you said. My mother's hands moved to her napkin. I didn't want to derail the evening with litigation discussions. And then my sister did something I hadn't expected. She didn't wait for anyone to give her space. She turned to face Felix's parents directly and said, in the clear, decided voice she uses when she has made up her mind about something. When I was 23, my landlord threatened to evict me in February over a heating dispute that was entirely his fault. I had no idea what to do, or what my rights even were. Delaney sat with me for 2 hours on a Tuesday night, after she'd already worked a full day and walked me through the entire tribunal process. She told me exactly what forms to file, what to say, what not to say. She did it without being asked, without making a big thing, because that's what she does. She paused. I just didn't know she'd been doing that for hundreds of people for years. I should have known. I should have asked. She looked at our mother. Not angry. Something quieter and more serious than angry. Why would you tell them administrative work? My mother's eyes filled. I was protecting this family. People get uncomfortable when Delaney talks about evictions and legal disputes at social dinners. I didn't want that following you and Felix into this relationship. Felix's father looked at my mother for a long moment. His expression was not unkind. It was simply accurate. What you've described, he said carefully, is editing one of your children out of the picture so the dinner conversation stays comfortable. That isn't protection. That is a choice made for your own ease. Gwendolyn said quietly, we came here to understand the family our son is joining. We needed real information to do that. We didn't get it. My father, who had been so still all evening that I had nearly stopped registering him, looked up from his plate. He looked at my mother for a long moment. Then he looked at me. She's right, Linda. This has gone on long enough. Felix's father reached into his jacket and set a card beside my water glass. If you're ever interested in contributing to the Housing Law Symposium at Osgood, Ms. Marsh, I'd be glad to talk about it. I looked at my sister. She had her hand flat on the tablecloth, and she was watching our mother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not judgment exactly, but the look of someone who has understood something for the first time, that has been true for a very long time. She turned to Felix. I need you to hear this clearly. I did not know she was telling your family those things about my sister. That matters to me. I need a few days to understand what I've been sitting inside of here. She slipped the ring from her finger and set it on the linen, not dramatically, gently. The way you set something down when you're not sure where it belongs yet. I'm not saying no, I'm saying not yet. Not until I understand this better. I stood, I picked up my blazer, I folded it over my arm. I looked at my mother. I love you, but tonight is the last night I sit at your table as a footnote. If you want me here, it has to be as I actually am. Not the quieter version you've decided is easier to explain. She flinched. My father bowed his head. I walked out. I didn't wait to see if anyone would call after me. By morning there were 9 messages on my phone. My mother's arrived in waves. First something that sounded like hurt, then something that sounded like defense, then a long silence, then something that circled back to the beginning. My sister called at 11 that night. Her voice was low and careful. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry that I noticed things over the years and kept finding reasons not to ask about them. My father sent a text at 5:58 a.m., 4 words. I should have spoken. Short, honest, more than a decade late, and a message from a number I didn't recognize until I read the name, Gwendolyn. My husband has been thinking about your clinic's work for months. I hope the other evening doesn't close a door. I'd like to have coffee if you're open to it. We met at a cafe on Queen West 3 weeks later. She wrapped her hands around her mug and said, she talked about you with such warmth when she described the community work. I think that warmth made me assume it came with understanding. She can love me and still need me to be smaller, I said. Those two things have existed together in her for as long as I can remember. Gwendolyn asked, what do you call it, the pattern? I thought about the hallway, the frames, the ribbon. The gallery wall, I said. Where you keep checking, over the years, to see if anything you've done has made it into the center. Whether your picture has moved forward. Did it ever? Once, I said, after all of this. My sister called 6 weeks after the dinner. Her apology came in stages the way real apologies do. Not one clean statement but a series of realizations, delivered as she reached each one. I told myself I was staying out of it. But staying out of it is its own choice. I made that choice every time. She apologized for that, specifically. By name, which is the only way an apology about something like that actually works. The ring went back on quietly. She sent me a photo one morning, just her hand resting on a railing, the ring catching the light. No caption. I wrote back, I see it. Good, that was enough. My mother called on a Tuesday afternoon in October. No occasion, just a Tuesday. I looked up the court decision, she said. The Marchetti Abubakar one, I found it on the court website. A pause. I didn't understand all the legal language, but I read it twice. Her voice changed slightly. I didn't know that's what you were actually doing. I had a picture in my head. I thought advocacy was meetings and pamphlets. I didn't understand you were keeping people in their homes in January. A long quiet on the line. I've been telling people a story about your work that wasn't accurate, she said. I told it for so long that I think I started to believe the version I'd built. It was easier than understanding something I didn't know how to explain at a dinner party. Another pause. I'm sorry for making you smaller so I could feel more comfortable. I don't think I knew I was doing it at first. I think I knew later, and kept doing it anyway. I'm not sure which is worse. It was not the apology I had carried in my head since I was 9 years old. Not a public reckoning, not a moment at a table with witnesses. It was a tired woman on a Tuesday afternoon in October, choosing to be honest, probably for the first time in a very long time about this particular thing. That counted. It counted in ways I didn't expect it to. If you want to try again, I said, it has to be with the real version of me, not the one that's easier to describe at book club. I know, she said, I know. I drove to Mississauga on a Sunday in January. No occasion. The particular flat grey cold of southern Ontario in midwinter had settled over everything. I let myself in. I stopped in the hallway. The gallery wall. I looked at it the way I have been looking at it for 22 years, bracing for what isn't there. In the center, where my sister's swim ribbon portrait used to be, there was a printed page tucked into the corner of an existing frame. Slightly crooked. The kind of crooked that happens when someone made a decision quickly and carried it out before they could change their mind. It was a printout of the decision summary from the Marchetti Abubakar case. The header, the neutral citation, the opening paragraph with my clinic's name, and then, 3 lines down, my name. Not framed, not matted, just printed on regular paper and placed there, imperfectly, in the space where it had never been. The brass lamp on the side table had been moved aside to make room for it. It was sitting slightly in front of the mirror now, as though whoever moved it wasn't sure where else to put it and just put it somewhere. At dinner, chicken and roasted potatoes, the Sunday standard in that house for as long as I can remember. My mother set down her fork while I was helping myself to a second serving and said, "Walk me through how a case like that actually works. From the very beginning, how do you start with nothing and end up in the Court of Appeal?" A basic question. The kind any parent might have asked at any table, at any point in the 7 years I had been building cases in Toronto. I started at the beginning. I described the intake call, the first client meeting, the way you read a lease, and learned to places where the law says one things, and the landlord did another. I described what a board hearing room looks like 7:30 in the morning when your client is sitting beside you and they're afraid. I described what it feels like to stand before a panel of appeal judges and understand that 63 families' January addresses depend on the precision of your language. My mother listened. She asked questions when she didn't follow something. Real questions, the kind that meant she was trying to understand rather than waiting for her turn to redirect. She didn't pivot to my sister. She didn't make the conversation smaller than it was. She nodded when something landed and asked again when it didn't. It was not a healed family. It was not the end of the work or the last difficult conversation we will ever have. The gallery wall has one printed page tucked imperfectly into a corner, and there is a long history of silence between us that will not dissolve over chicken and roasted potatoes on a January Sunday. I know that, but there was a door open in that house that had been sealed for most of my adult life, and I had walked through it. And that was not nothing. If you have ever sat at a table where your own family treated you like a supporting character in a story they wrote without you, where the version of you they presented to the world was tidier and smaller, and safer than the life you were actually building. Hear this clearly. Love that asks you to be less than you are is not protection, it is management, and you are not a problem to be managed. The night Felix's father stopped in front of my chair and asked who I was to my own family, I thought being honest might cost me my mother for good. What it actually cost me was the role she had written for me. The quiet eldest daughter who keeps her work in a folder no one opens, so the shape of the family can stay the shape she designed. Roles can change, but only when someone stops performing the one that was handed to them without their consent. And if you are sitting at a table right now, where the price of belonging is making yourself fit a frame that was built for a smaller version of you, ask yourself one question. Who decided that frame was the right size? Because the first person who needs to understand you've outgrown it is not them. It's you.